If you love your grandchild, you'll prove it now, she said, her voice ice-cold as she stared me down across their living room. We need your life savings for the baby's future, and frankly, we're starting to wonder if you really care about this family at all. I looked at my son Jake, waiting for him to defend me, to remember who I was. Instead, he nodded and said, "Dad, it's for the baby. Isn't that what inheritance is for?" That's when I knew I'd lost him. My name is Frank Sullivan, I'm 58 years old, and what I'm about to share with you changed everything I thought I knew about love, money, and family loyalty. Before I continue, if you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. These real-life stories don't tell themselves, and your support means everything. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love connecting with people from all over the world who understand that sometimes family drama knows no boundaries. Let me start from the beginning. The kitchen clock ticked its familiar rhythm as I sat in the pre-dawn darkness, cradling my coffee mug like a prayer. 5:37 a.m. The same time Eleanor used to wake up, humming some half-remembered tune while she started the day. That clock had been her choice, brass with Roman numerals, sophisticated, she'd called it. Now it just counted the empty hours. 3 years since the funeral. 3 years since I'd learned to make coffee for one, to buy groceries for one, to wake up in a bed that felt too big and too quiet. But I'd managed. 58 years old, pension steady, and a nest egg that represented 35 years of skipped vacations and brown bag lunches. $68,000. Not a fortune, but enough to make me sleep soundly knowing I'd never be a burden to anyone. My son Jake had been my anchor through it all. Every Saturday morning, he'd show up with donuts and terrible jokes, sprawling across Eleanor's old chair like he still belonged here. We'd talk about everything and nothing, his job at the engineering firm, my volunteer work at the food bank, whether the Cubs would ever win another World Series in our lifetime. You know, Dad, he'd say, stealing the last glazed donut, Mom would have loved seeing you volunteer. She always said you had more kindness in you than you knew what to do with. Those Saturdays kept me human. Kept me connected to the world beyond these four walls and the ghosts that lived in them. Everything changed the day he brought Cassandra home. I heard her before I saw her, a laugh that rang like crystal, sharp and bright. Jake's key turned in the lock and there she was, all blonde highlights and designer handbag, surveying my living room like she was calculating square footage. "Dad, this is Cassandra," Jake said, and his voice carried something I'd never heard before, a note of deference, like he was presenting her for approval rather than the other way around. She smiled, and it was perfect. Too perfect. "Mr. Sullivan, I've heard so much about you. Jake talks about you constantly." Her eyes swept the room, lingering on Eleanor's knitted throw pillows, the family photos clustered on the mantel, the worn patch on the carpet where Eleanor used to pace when she was thinking. What a charming home. So lived in. That word, lived in, hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. "Thank you," I said, because what else do you say when someone compliments you with the enthusiasm of someone commenting on the weather? Jake beamed like she'd just recited poetry. "Isn't she great, Dad? Cass has such an eye for potential. Potential. As if my 30-year home needed improving." Over dinner, she asked questions. Thoughtful questions, the kind that made Jake nod approvingly. How long had I lived here? Was I thinking about downsizing? Had I ever considered what I might do with all this space as I got older? "It's just that properties in this neighborhood have such value," she said, cutting her chicken into precise, identical pieces. "I work in real estate marketing, so I notice these things. You're sitting on a goldmine, Mr. Patterson." I watched Jake hang on her every word, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. "I hadn't really thought about selling," I said. "This is home." "Of course," she agreed quickly. "I just meant, well, when you're ready. Someday." But her eyes had already moved on, cataloging the antique sideboard Eleanor had inherited from her mother, the original hardwood floors, the bay window that let in morning light. After they left, I stood in my kitchen washing dishes, trying to shake the feeling that someone had just appraised my life and found it inefficient. The next few weeks brought subtle changes. Jake's Saturday visits became shorter, punctuated by phone calls from Cassandra about dinner plans or errands they needed to run. When he did stay for coffee, he'd mention things she'd said, how impressed she was with my financial discipline, how smart I was to have savings at my age, how lucky any grandchildren would be to have such a forward-thinking grandfather. "She really gets you, Dad," he said one morning, scrolling through his phone while I tried to tell him about the new volunteer coordinator at the food bank. "She says she can tell you're the kind of man who thinks about the future." That autumn, they announced their engagement. Then, faster than I could process, came the wedding, a small ceremony that somehow cost more than my first car. Cassandra looked radiant in white silk, and Jake looked different. Smaller somehow, like he was holding his breath. At the reception, she found me by the coffee station. "I'm so glad we're family now," she said, touching my arm with fingertips that felt cold through my jacket. "Jake and I have such plans. We want to start a family right away, give you those grandchildren you deserve." "That's wonderful," I said, and meant it. "The thing is," she continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "young families today face such challenges. Housing costs, childcare, education. It's overwhelming. Jake worries constantly about providing the right opportunities." I nodded, remembering my own sleepless nights when Jake was young, calculating grocery budgets and praying the car would make it another month. "That's why I think it's so beautiful when grandparents can help give their grandchildren the best possible start. Don't you?" Something in her tone made me look up. Her smile was still perfect, but her eyes held a weight I couldn't quite read. "Of course," I said carefully. "When the time comes." "Exactly," she said, squeezing my arm. "When the time comes." 6 months later, Cassandra was pregnant. The announcement came via text message, a photo of a positive pregnancy test with the caption, "Surprise, Grandpa." Jake called an hour later, breathless with excitement, talking over himself about due dates and doctor appointments and how Cassandra was already reading parenting books. "She's incredible, Dad. She's got everything planned out, the nursery, the pediatrician, even preschools. She wants this baby to have every advantage." "That's wonderful, son. I can't wait to meet my grandchild. Actually, that's something we wanted to talk to you about. Cass thinks it would be better if visitors wait until after the first trimester. You know, to reduce stress and exposure to germs." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Of course. Whatever's best for the baby. But as the weeks passed, the restrictions multiplied. The first trimester became the second. Doctor's orders became Cassandra's preferences. My weekly check-in calls with Jake grew shorter, interrupted by her voice in the background, reminding him about appointments, suggesting he should rest, pointing out how late it was getting. "She takes such good care of me," Jake would say, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I don't know what I'd do without her." When I tried to visit, there was always a reason why it wasn't convenient. Cassandra had morning sickness. She needed quiet to rest. The doctor had recommended minimal disruptions. Could we reschedule? By the 7th month, I realized I hadn't seen my son face-to-face in 3 weeks. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening. Jake called, and for the first time in months, he sounded like himself, tired but excited. "Dad, we need to talk. Can you come over Thursday evening? Cass wants to discuss something important." My heart lifted. Finally, an invitation. Finally, a chance to be part of this journey. Their apartment was different than I remembered, sparse, modern, all the warmth edited out. Cassandra sat in a cream-colored chair that looked expensive, her hands folded over her rounded belly. Jake perched on the edge of the couch, forward-leaning, eager. "Mr. Sullivan," Cassandra began, and I noticed she'd stopped calling me by my first name sometime after the wedding. "We wanted to share some exciting news with you." She gestured to a stack of papers on the coffee table, pamphlets, printouts, what looked like financial documents. We've been researching the best possible start for the baby. Private preschool, music lessons, language immersion, college savings. We want to give our child every opportunity. I nodded, thinking of the modest college fund I'd already started for my future grandchild. That's admirable. The thing is, Jake jumped in, his words rushing together, it's expensive. Really expensive. And we've been thinking about how fortunate the baby is to have a grandfather who's been so financially responsible. Cassandra leaned forward, her voice soft as velvet. We know you have savings, and we know you're careful with money. That's exactly the kind of wisdom we want to pass on to our child. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. What we're proposing, she continued, is an investment in your grandchild's future. We've calculated the costs for optimal child development through age 18, and with your life savings as seed money, we could set up educational trusts, music programs, sports activities, everything. The number she quoted made my head spin. More than my entire nest egg. More than I'd saved in a lifetime of careful living. Think about it, Jake said, his eyes bright with possibility. Your money, working to give your grandchild the absolute best. Isn't that what inheritance is for? I looked at my son, really looked at him. When had his shoulders started curving inward? When had his voice taken on that pleading quality? I started, then stopped. That's a big decision. I'd need time to think. Cassandra's smile tightened at the corners. Of course. But time is a factor. Early childhood development windows don't wait, and the best programs have waiting lists. How much time are we talking about? I asked. Well, she exchanged a glance with Jake, we'd need to start the applications next week. So maybe, by Friday. 3 days. 3 days to decide whether to hand over the security I'd spent decades building. I understand you need to think about it, Jake said, but his voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. Just remember, Dad, this isn't really about you anymore. This is about your grandchild. The drive home passed in a blur. I sat in my kitchen with the brass clock ticking, staring at Eleanor's empty chair, trying to understand what had just happened. Had I just been asked to fund my grandchild's future? Or had I just been given an ultimatum? Thursday became Friday. Friday became a phone call. Dad? Jake's voice was tight. Have you made a decision? I'm still thinking, son. A pause. Then Cassandra's voice, distant but clear enough. Let me talk to him. Mr. Sullivan, and her tone had shed all pretense of warmth, I'm going to be direct. Jake and I have discussed this, and we feel like you're being selfish. The word hit like a slap. We're offering you the chance to be a meaningful part of your grandchild's life, and you're hesitating over money. Money that, frankly, you don't even need. What are you saving it for? You're 58 years old, you have a pension, your house is paid off. What possible use could you have for that money that's more important than your grandchild's future? I found my voice. It's my security. My independence. Your security. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You're worried about security when your son and his unborn child need help. What kind of father does that? Cassandra, please, Jake's voice, fainter, pleading. No, Jake. He needs to hear this. Mr. Patterson, if you love your grandchild, if you love Jake, you'll prove it. Because honestly, we're starting to wonder if you really care about this family at all. The line went quiet except for the sound of my own breathing. I need more time, I said finally. Time's up, she replied. We need an answer by tomorrow, or we'll have to assume you've made your choice. The phone went dead. I sat in the gathering darkness, the weight of 30 years pressing down on my shoulders. In my hand, Eleanor's engagement ring, the one I'd never been able to give away, caught the last light from the window. What would you do, Elle? I asked the empty room. What would you tell me? But I already knew. Eleanor had never trusted easy answers or pretty words. She'd trusted actions, character, the slow accumulation of evidence over time. And the evidence was becoming clear. Saturday morning, I drove to the bank. I'd like to set up a trust, I told the financial advisor, a kind woman named Beth who'd helped me manage Eleanor's life insurance. For my grandchild. That's wonderful, she said. What kind of access are you thinking about? The child can access it at 25. Not before. No one else has any authority over it. No one. She nodded, making notes. And the trustees? You and the bank. No family members. Her pen paused. Are you sure? That's unusual. I'm sure. 2 hours later, I transferred $60,000 into an irrevocable trust for my future grandchild. The remaining $8,000 went into a new account in my name only. Enough. For a fresh start, if I needed one. That evening, I called Jake. Dad. His voice was bright with anticipation. Did you decide? I did. I've set up a trust for the baby. $60,000, available when they turn 25. Silence. When they turn 25? Jake's voice had gone flat. That's right. For college, or a house, or whatever they need as an adult. Dad, that's not, we need the money now. For preschool, for programs, for. For what, exactly? Another pause. Then Cassandra's voice, sharp and clear, let me talk to him. Mr. Patterson, and now I could hear her real voice, stripped of performance, what you've done is useless. We need liquid capital for immediate educational investments. A trust that sits there for 20 years helps no one. It helps my grandchild have options as an adult. Your grandchild needs opportunities as a child. This is completely unacceptable. I'm sorry you feel that way. Sorry. You're sorry. Her voice rose. Do you understand what you've done? You've basically stolen from your own grandchild. You've chosen money over family. I've chosen to protect money for my grandchild. Protected it from what? From their own parents. What exactly are you implying? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I'm not implying anything. I'm being clear. The money is for the baby, when they're old enough to make their own decisions about it. This is unbelievable, she said, and I could hear her voice getting further from the phone, like she was pacing. Jake, are you going to let him do this? Are you going to let your father disrespect your family like this? Dad, Jake's voice was small now, maybe we could compromise. Maybe a partial trust, and some immediate access. The decision is made, son. Fine, Cassandra's voice, close to the phone again. You want to play games with your grandchild's future? You want to choose money over family? Don't expect to be part of this baby's life. Don't expect to see your grandchild at all. The line went dead. I stood holding the phone, listening to the dial tone, feeling something break inside my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house, touching Eleanor's things, looking at photos of Jake as a boy, gap-toothed grins and Little League uniforms and Christmas mornings. Somewhere in those pictures was the moment I'd lost him, and I couldn't find it. At 3 a.m., my phone rang. Dad? Jake's voice was whisper-soft. I'm sorry about earlier. Cass was upset, but she doesn't mean. I mean, of course you'll see the baby. Will I? Dad, you're my father. You'll always be my father. But? A long pause. But maybe you could reconsider. About the trust? Maybe we could find a middle ground. And there it was. The choice, laid bare. Jake, do you remember when you were 8, and you wanted that expensive bike for your birthday? Dad, I don't see what. Do you remember what I told you? A sigh. You said wanting something didn't make it mine. That's right. And what else? That sometimes love means saying no. Do you still believe that? Silence stretched between us. I have to go, he said finally. Cass is calling. The next 3 weeks passed like a fever dream. No calls from Jake. No updates about doctor appointments or baby preparations. I drove past their apartment twice, but Jake's car wasn't there. I threw myself into volunteer work, spending extra hours at the food bank, helping families who reminded me that there were different kinds of poverty. The kind where you counted every dollar for groceries. The kind where you chose between heat and medicine. The kind where love was measured in sacrifices no one else could see. Then, on a Thursday evening, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Jake standing alone on my front step, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "Hi, Dad." He looked older. Tired. His face had lost some essential quality I couldn't name. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. He sat heavily on the couch, in the same spot where he presented Cassandra's plan 3 weeks earlier. "The baby's due next month," he said without preamble. "How are you feeling?" "Scared," he said, and laughed shakily. "Terrified, actually." I waited. Cass has everything planned out. Every detail. The birthing plan, the nursery design, the feeding schedule. She's bought books about infant development, sleep training, optimal stimulation patterns. He rubbed his face with both hands. "I feel like I'm failing already, and the baby isn't even here yet." "Why do you feel like you're failing?" "Because I can't give them everything she wants to give them. The private schools, the tutors, the lessons. I make decent money, Dad, but not that kind of money. And every time I try to suggest maybe we start smaller, maybe we see what we actually need instead of planning for every possibility, she looks at me like I don't love our child enough." The words hung between us like a confession. "Do you want to know what I think?" I asked. He nodded. "I think that baby is lucky to have a father who's already thinking about what they need instead of what they want. I think love and attention matter more than music lessons. I think children thrive on consistency and kindness, not expensive programs." His eyes filled with tears. "But what if I'm wrong? What if Cass is right, and I'm just limited in my thinking? Jake, what did your mother and I give you that you remember most?" He was quiet for a long time, thinking. "Saturday morning pancakes," he said finally. "The way Mom sang while she cooked. The way you taught me to throw a curveball in the backyard. Family game nights when it rained. None of that cost extra money." "No," he said softly. "It didn't." We sat in comfortable silence while the brass clock ticked away the minutes. "Dad," he said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Okay. Do you think Cass loves me? Really loves me?" The question broke my heart, but I'd promised honesty. "I think she loves the life she imagines you can give her. I think she loves the security and status she associates with you. But love, real love? Real love doesn't come with price tags attached." He nodded slowly, like he'd been waiting for someone to say it out loud. "I keep thinking about the engagement ring," he said suddenly. "What about it?" She picked it out. Sent me the link, told me the exact one she wanted. When I gave it to her, she cried and said it was perfect. But later, I heard her on the phone with a friend, saying she'd had to guide my taste, because men don't understand these things. He looked up at me. Should a woman have to guide a man's taste when he's trying to show love? What do you think? "I think when Mom showed me her ring after you died, she told me the diamond was tiny but it was yours. She said she loved it because you saved for months to buy it, and you picked it yourself because you thought it looked like a star." "She told you that?" "She said it was the most beautiful ring in the world because it came from your heart, not from her instructions." We both sat with that for a moment. Dad, Jake said finally, I think I've made some mistakes. We all make mistakes, son. Big ones, though. I think I've let someone else's voice become louder than my own voice. And now I don't know how to get back to myself. It's not too late, I said. It's never too late to remember who you are. He stayed for 2 more hours. We talked about the baby, about fears and hopes and the difference between providing and performing. When he left, he hugged me tight. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. But even as I said it, I knew something was coming. Change, disruption, a reckoning that had been building for months. It arrived the next morning in the form of a phone call from Cassandra. Mr. Sullivan, her voice was ice-cold professional. I'm calling to inform you that Jake and I have made a decision about your role in our child's life. What kind of decision? Given your unwillingness to support your grandchild's future, and given the negative influence we feel you've had on Jake's commitment to his family, we've decided it would be best if you had no contact with our child. The words hit like physical blows. You don't have the right to make that decision, I said. Actually, as the parents, we have every right. Jake agrees with me completely. Let me talk to Jake. Jake is busy. He's focusing on his real family now, his wife and child. Not someone who chooses money over love. I didn't choose money over love. I chose to protect money for love. Semantics, she said dismissively. The result is the same. You've shown us who you are, Mr. Patterson. You're selfish, manipulative, and destructive to this family's well-being. Where is Jake? That's not your concern anymore. He's my son. He's my husband. And he's chosen his wife and child over a bitter old man who uses money as a weapon. I want to talk to him. That's not going to happen. Goodbye, Mr. Sullivan. Don't call here again. The line went dead, and I was left staring at the phone like it might offer explanation for what had just happened. For the next week, I called every day. The phone went straight to voicemail, first Jake's voice, then Cassandra's, then a generic automated message. I drove to their apartment, Jake's car was gone, and a neighbor mentioned seeing a moving truck. They had disappeared. I hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Frank who wore bad suits and drank too much coffee. He found them in 2 days. They're renting a house about 40 miles north, he said, sliding a folder across the table. Looks like they moved fast. Lease is under her name only. Inside the folder were photos of a small ranch house, Jake's car in the driveway, Cassandra checking the mailbox with her hand protectively over her belly. You want me to keep watching? Frank asked. No, I said, closing the folder. Thank you. That night, I sat in my kitchen with Eleanor's photo on the table in front of me. I lost him, Elle, I said to her smile. I lost our boy. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. I hadn't lost Jake, someone had taken him, piece by piece, decision by decision, until he couldn't find his way back to himself. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I started planning at sunrise. First, I called Beth at the bank and moved the remaining $8,000 to a secure account with online access. Then I called my neighbor, Mrs. Henley, and asked if she'd mind collecting my mail for a few weeks. I'd be traveling, I said. A little vacation. That's wonderful, dear, she said. You need to get out more. Next, I called the food bank and arranged for extended leave. Family emergency, I explained, which was true enough. By noon, I'd bought a bus ticket to a small coastal town I'd seen in a travel magazine at the dentist's office. Beaumont Bay, Maine. Population 3,200. The kind of place where strangers were noticed but not necessarily unwelcome. That evening, I packed 1 suitcase with clothes, 1 box with photos and a few of Eleanor's things, and left everything else as it was. On the kitchen table, I placed an envelope addressed to Jake. Inside, I'd written, Son. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not forever, but for now. I need you to know that this isn't about anger or punishment. This is about love, the kind of love that sometimes requires distance. I've watched someone I don't recognize make decisions for the son I raised. I've watched that son disappear behind someone else's voice, someone else's demands, someone else's definition of what love should look like. I hope someday you'll remember who you were before someone told you who you should be. I hope you'll remember that the best things in life, Saturday morning pancakes, backyard baseball, the sound of your mother's laughter, can't be bought with anyone's money. Your child's trust fund remains untouched. When they turn 25, they'll have $60,000 and the freedom to decide what kind of life they want to build. That's my gift to them, not just money, but choice. I'll be waiting when you're ready to remember yourself. Until then, I'm going to remember myself too. Love always, Dad. I left the letter propped against the brass clock, grabbed my suitcase, and walked out of the house I'd shared with Eleanor for 28 years. The bus ride to Maine took 14 hours with transfers, and I spent most of it staring out the window at changing landscapes, suburbs giving way to farmland, farmland to forests, forests to coastline. With each mile, I felt something loosening in my chest. Beaumont Bay was everything the magazine had promised: weathered fishing boats, houses painted the color of sea glass, air that tasted like salt and possibility. I rented a small apartment above a bakery for the first month, then found a cottage 2 blocks from the harbor that came furnished and smelled like cedar and old books. The first week was hardest. I'd wake up reaching for my phone, wanting to call Jake, then remember that Jake was gone, not dead, but disappeared into someone else's life. I'd walk the harbor in the early morning, watching lobstermen check their traps, trying to understand how I'd ended up in this strange place, starting over at 58. But slowly, something unexpected happened. I began to sleep through the night. The tension I'd carried in my shoulders for months started to ease. I stopped checking my phone every 10 minutes. I found work at a local bookstore, shelving inventory and helping customers find titles they half remembered. The owner, a woman named Grace with silver hair and paint-stained fingers, asked no questions about my past and accepted my cash deposit on the cottage without demanding references. "Everyone's running from something," she said the day she hired me. "Question is whether you're running towards something too." I wasn't sure, but I was willing to find out. Evenings, I walked the coast road and wrote letters I'd never send, to Jake, to Eleanor, to the grandchild I might never meet. I told them about the lighthouse that painted golden stripes across my cottage wall at sunset. About the fisherman who brought me fresh scallops every Thursday and refused payment. About the way my shoulders had finally learned to relax. "I'm not hiding," I wrote in one letter to Jake. "I'm healing. I hope someday you'll understand the difference." 6 weeks into my new life, Grace invited me to dinner at her house, a rambling Victorian filled with books and artwork and the kind of comfortable chaos that comes from a life fully lived. "You're looking better," she said over lobster stew and crusty bread. "Less like a man carrying the world." "I feel lighter," I admitted. Guilty about feeling lighter, but lighter. Why guilty? Because I left my son when he might need me most. Grace studied me over her wine glass. "Did you leave him? Or did you stop enabling the people who were using you to hurt him?" The question sat between us like a meditation. "I don't know anymore," I said finally. "Love isn't always proximity," she said. "Sometimes love is showing someone what strength looks like. Sometimes it's refusing to participate in your own destruction." That night, I dreamed about Eleanor for the first time since leaving home. In the dream, we were young again, sitting on the beach where we'd honeymooned. She was reading a book I couldn't see, occasionally looking up to watch seabirds dive for fish. "Are you disappointed in me?" I asked her. She closed the book and smiled. "For what?" "For giving up. For running away. Is that what you think you did?" I considered this. "I don't know what I did." "You protected something precious," she said. You refuse to let fear make you smaller than you are. You chose dignity over desperation. But Jake. Jake is learning, she said gently. Some lessons can't be taught, love. Some lessons have to be lived. I woke with sunlight streaming through my cottage windows and the sound of waves against the harbor rocks. For the first time in months, I felt peaceful. That morning brought a phone call that changed everything. Mr. Sullivan. The voice was young, nervous. This is Sarah Williams from Mercy General Hospital. I'm calling about your son, Jake Sullivan. My heart stopped. What happened? He's fine, she said quickly. But he asked me to call you. He's here because his wife, Cassandra, she went into labor early. The baby came 3 weeks premature. Is the baby okay? The baby's fine. A little girl, healthy, just small. But Mr. Patterson, your son asked me to call you specifically. He said it was important that you know he's become a father, and that he. She paused, like she was reading from notes, that he remembers who he is now. My hands shook as I wrote down the hospital information. Is he able to talk? He's with the baby right now, but he left a message. He said to tell you her name is Eleanor Rose, and that he hopes you'll come meet her when you're ready. Eleanor Rose. I hung up the phone and sat in my small kitchen, surrounded by the smell of salt air and fresh bread from the bakery below, and cried like I hadn't cried since Eleanor's funeral. 3 hours later, I was on a bus heading home. The hospital was bright and sterile, everything my cottage wasn't. I found Jake in the neonatal unit, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in pink blankets, tears streaming down his face. Dad, he said when he saw me, and his voice broke. I'm so sorry. Shoo, I said, moving to his side. Let me see my granddaughter. Eleanor Rose was perfect, tiny fingers, dark hair, Eleanor's nose. She opened her eyes as I looked at her, and I swear she looked directly at me with an expression of mild curiosity. She's beautiful, son. Dad, I need to tell you something. Jake's voice was stronger now. Cass is gone. I looked up, confused. 2 days ago, she said she needed some time to think. About us, about the baby, about what she really wanted. She went to stay with her sister in California. She said. He paused, adjusting the baby's blanket. She said being a mother was harder than she expected, and that maybe she wasn't ready for this kind of responsibility. Jake, I'm sorry. I'm not, he said, and his voice was clear. Dad, I should have listened to you months ago. I should have seen what was happening. She didn't want a family, she wanted an investment opportunity. She didn't love me, she loved what she thought I could become. Eleanor Rose made a small sound, and Jake smiled down at her. But this little one, he said softly, she just wants her daddy. She doesn't care if I have money for private preschool or violin lessons. She just wants to be loved. That's all any child really wants, I said. I know that now. He looked up at me. Dad, I know I have no right to ask this, but I need help. Not money, he added quickly. I need to learn how to be a father. I need to remember how to trust my own voice. I reached out and touched my granddaughter's tiny hand. Her fingers wrapped around my index finger with surprising strength. I'd be honored to help, I said. That evening, Jake and I sat in the hospital cafeteria while Eleanor Rose slept in the nursery. He told me about the last few months, how Cassandra had become increasingly controlling, how she'd isolated him from friends and family, how she'd made him feel like every decision he made independently was wrong. The morning Eleanor was born, he said, stirring sugar into terrible coffee, Cass looked at her and said, she's smaller than I expected. I hope this doesn't affect her developmental trajectory. What did you say? I said, she's perfect. And Cass looked at me like I was missing the point. He shook his head. That's when I knew. When I really knew. She wasn't seeing our daughter, she was seeing a project that hadn't met specifications. What changed your mind about calling me? Jake was quiet for a long time. When I was holding Eleanor for the first time, I started thinking about what I wanted to tell her about her grandfather. And I realized I had nothing. I'd let someone convince me that you were selfish and manipulative, but when I tried to find examples, I couldn't. All I could remember was Saturday morning pancakes and bedtime stories and the way you taught me to be honest even when it was hard. He looked up at me. I called the house, but Mrs. Henley said you'd gone traveling. She gave me your letter. What did you think of it? I thought you were right. About everything. I thought I'd lost the best man I knew because I was too scared to trust my own judgment. That night, I checked into a hotel near the hospital and called Grace in Maine to explain that I'd be gone a little longer. Good, she said. Some things are worth going back for. Will you hold my job? I'll hold whatever you need me to hold. Take care of your family. The next 3 weeks were a gift I hadn't expected. Jake moved back into his old apartment and asked if I'd stay to help with Eleanor. We developed a routine: early morning feedings and diaper changes, afternoon walks around the neighborhood, evening conversations while the baby slept. Jake was a natural father, tender and patient and completely smitten. Watching him discover his own instincts, his own voice, was like watching someone come back to life. She likes it when I sing to her, he told me one evening, rocking Eleanor while humming an old lullaby Eleanor used to sing to him. Your mother sang that same song to you. I remember, he said. I remember a lot of things now. Cassandra called once, 3 weeks after Eleanor's birth. Jake put the call on speaker at my suggestion. How's my baby? She asked, but her voice carried the tone of someone calling to check on a houseplant. She's wonderful, Jake said. Growing every day. Good. Listen, I've been thinking, and I've decided I want to come back. But I need some guarantees about our financial future. I've been researching childcare costs and education expenses, and I think we need to revisit the conversation about your father's contribution. Jake looked at me across the room where I was folding tiny clothes. Cass, he said gently, that conversation is over. Dad set up a trust for Eleanor that she'll access when she's an adult. That's what's available. That's completely unacceptable. I'm her mother, and I should have input into how her future is funded. You're her mother when it's convenient, Jake said, and his voice was steady. You left 3 weeks ago because being a parent was too hard. You don't get to come back and make financial demands. Silence on the line. Are you choosing your father over your wife? Cassandra asked finally. I'm choosing my daughter over everyone else, Jake said. Including you. Including him. Including myself when necessary. This is ridiculous. I'm coming home, and we're going to work this out. No, Jake said quietly. You're not. I filed for divorce, Cass. The papers will be served tomorrow. The sound that came through the phone was pure rage. You can't do this. That's my daughter. And you'll have visitation rights. When you're ready to be a mother instead of a financial planner. He hung up and looked at me with tears in his eyes. I'm proud of you, I said. I'm scared, he admitted. Good fathers are scared. It means you understand the responsibility. That evening, Jake asked if I'd stay permanently, move back home, help him raise Eleanor, be the grandfather I'd always wanted to be. I want to, I said. But I need to go back to Maine first. I need to close out my life there properly. How long? A month. Maybe 2. I want to finish out my commitment to Grace, and I want to pack up Eleanor's things properly. I smiled. I left some unfinished business there. What kind of business? The kind where you learn who you are when nobody's watching. Jake nodded like he understood. I returned to Maine that Friday, and Grace greeted me like I'd been gone a year instead of 3 weeks. How's the granddaughter? Perfect. Complicated, but perfect. The best things usually are. I spent 6 weeks in Beaumont Bay, finishing my commitment to the bookstore and packing up the cottage that had become my sanctuary. I wrote letters to Eleanor Rose every day, telling her about the lighthouse and the fishermen and the way the ocean looked different every morning. I wanted her to know about this place where her grandfather had learned to be himself again. On my last night, Grace and I sat on her porch drinking wine and watching the sunset paint the harbor gold. "You could stay," she said. "Bring them here for visits. There are worse places to raise a child." "There are," I agreed. "But Jake needs to find his own way now. And I need to be where my family is. Will you be okay? Going back to all those memories." I thought about it. I think the memories will be different now. I think I'll see them with clearer eyes. And the money? The trust fund that started all this? Still there. Still untouchable until Eleanor turns 25. She'll have choices I never had. Grace smiled. "You did a good thing, you know. Standing your ground. It didn't feel good at the time. The best decisions rarely do." I flew home on a Tuesday morning in November, and Jake met me at the airport with Eleanor Rose in a carrier strapped to his chest. She'd grown in 6 weeks, her eyes more alert, her expressions more definite. "How was the flight, Grandpa?" Jake asked, and the words sounded natural now, like he'd been practicing. "Long," I said, reaching out to touch Eleanor's cheek. "But worth it." We drove through familiar streets toward my house, and I felt something settling in my chest, not the heavy weight I'd carried before, but something lighter, more solid. The feeling of coming home to a place that fit. "How does it feel?" Jake asked as we pulled into my driveway. I looked at the house I'd shared with Eleanor, the windows that had watched me break and rebuild, the front door that had closed behind me when I thought I was leaving forever. "It feels like mine," I said. That evening, we established a new routine. Jake would come for dinner twice a week, and I'd babysit Eleanor Rose every Saturday morning while he ran errands or simply remembered how to be alone with his thoughts. Sundays were family days, all 3 of us, sometimes just sitting quietly while Eleanor Rose discovered her hands or tried to focus on the mobile above her crib. "Dad," Jake said one Sunday afternoon while Eleanor napped between us on the couch, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stood up to Cass? If you'd just given her the money?" I considered this. "I think you would have learned to hate yourself. I think Eleanor would have grown up thinking love was conditional on performance. I think the money would have been gone in 2 years, and Cassandra would have found new ways to make you feel inadequate. And now? Now you're learning to trust yourself. Eleanor is learning that she's loved for who she is, not what she might become. And when she's 25, she'll have choices. What if she doesn't want the money? What if she decides to give it away or spend it on something we think is foolish? Then she'll have learned to make her own decisions. That's worth more than any amount we could save for her." As winter settled over our small family, I found myself thinking often about the months in Maine, about the choice to leave and the choice to return. Both had been necessary. The leaving taught me who I was when stripped of context and expectation, and the returning taught me that home isn't a place you're trapped in, but a place you choose. Eleanor Rose grew stronger and more curious each day. By Christmas, she was sitting up with support and laughing at Jake's ridiculous faces. On Christmas morning, Jake brought her over early, and we spent the day on my living room floor, surrounded by simple gifts and complicated love. "I want to tell her about Mom someday," Jake said, watching Eleanor Rose try to eat wrapping paper. "About how strong she was, how kind." "We will," I said. "We'll tell her about all the women who made her possible. Even Cassandra. Even Cassandra. She'll need to understand that not all stories have simple endings." That afternoon, Jake fell asleep on the couch with Eleanor Rose on his chest, and I sat in Eleanor's old chair, watching them breathe in sync. The brass clock ticked its familiar rhythm, counting moments that felt like gifts. 6 months later, Jake called me on a Saturday morning with excitement in his voice. "Dad, you need to see this. I drove to his apartment to find Eleanor Rose, now 8 months old, pulling herself up to standing in her crib. When she saw me, she reached out her arms and said, "Clear as day, Papa." Did she just? I started. Her first word, Jake said, grinning. "Not Mama, not Dada. Papa." I lifted her out of the crib, and she patted my face with her small hands, chattering in the language only babies know. In that moment, holding my granddaughter while she told me stories I couldn't understand but felt in my bones, I realized the truth that had taken me almost 60 years to learn. Love isn't about giving people what they demand. Love is about giving them what they need, even when, especially when, they can't see the difference. Eleanor Rose will grow up knowing that her grandfather stood firm when it mattered. She'll inherit not just money, but the knowledge that someone fought for her right to choose her own path. She'll understand that real love sometimes looks like saying no, like walking away, like having the courage to let someone find their own way back to themselves. And someday, when she's 25 and receives the letter I've already written to accompany her trust fund, she'll read these words, "My dear Eleanor Rose. This money represents more than savings, it represents the belief that you are capable of making your own choices about your own life. It represents the faith that you will grow into someone who values character over convenience, love over leverage. I hope by the time you read this, you'll understand that the greatest gift I could give you wasn't money at all. It was the example of what it looks like to stand by your principles, even when it costs you everything you think you want. Choose your own path, sweetheart. Trust your own voice. And remember that you are loved not for what you achieve, but for who you are. All my love, Grandpa." The clock on my kitchen wall ticks toward evening as I finish writing this letter. Tomorrow, Eleanor Rose will turn 1 year old, and will celebrate with cake she'll mostly wear and presents she'll prefer to ignore in favor of the wrapping paper. Jake has become the father I always knew he could be, patient, present, completely devoted to helping his daughter discover who she is. He dates occasionally, but he's in no hurry. He's learning to love himself first, to trust his own judgment, to believe that he deserves someone who appreciates what he offers instead of demanding what he lacks. As for me, I'm learning what it means to be a grandfather, not the kind who spoils with money, but the kind who spoils with attention, with stories, with the radical notion that a child is already perfect exactly as they are. Sometimes I think about Cassandra, wonder if she ever thinks about the daughter she left behind. She sends birthday cards twice a year, one on Eleanor's actual birthday, one on the wrong date, as if she's not quite sure. Jake keeps them in a box, saying someday Eleanor can decide what to do with them. "Do you think she'll want to know her mother?" he asked me recently. "I think she'll want to understand her story," I said. "All of it. The complicated parts and the simple parts and the parts that don't make sense." That's her right. We were sitting on my back porch, watching Eleanor Rose chase bubbles in the evening light. She's walking now, toddling around with the confidence of someone who doesn't yet know that falling is supposed to hurt. "Dad," Jake said suddenly, "I need to thank you." "For what?" "For showing me what it looks like to love someone enough to let them go. For teaching me that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst impulses. For proving that real strength isn't about giving in, it's about standing up." I watched my granddaughter discover a dandelion, her face lighting up with wonder at something the rest of us consider a weed. "I was just trying to protect what mattered," I said. "You did," Jake said quietly. "You protected all of us." As the sun sets behind my house, the house I almost lost, the home I chose to fight for, I understand something I couldn't have grasped 2 years ago. Love isn't a transaction. It isn't something you buy or earn or trade. Love is something you guard, something you protect, something you refuse to let other people define for you. I loved my son enough to risk losing him rather than watch him lose himself. I loved my granddaughter enough to secure her future rather than fund her mother's fantasies. I loved myself enough to walk away when staying would have meant betraying everything I believed about what family should be. And now, in the evening light, with the sound of my granddaughter's laughter drifting through the screen door and the knowledge that my son remembers who he is, I understand that love always finds its way home. It just sometimes takes the long way around. The brass clock in my kitchen chimes 7 times, marking another hour in a life that almost went a very different way. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities to stand firm when it matters. But tonight, I'm exactly where I belong, surrounded by the people who matter most, in a home that holds 30 years of memories and a future full of possibilities. Tonight, the balance sheet reads the way it should: love given, love returned, and principles intact. And somewhere in California, there's a trust fund waiting for a little girl to grow up and learn that the most valuable inheritance isn't money at all. It's the knowledge that she was loved enough to be given the freedom to choose. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe.